So let's begin by saying I do love the name of this song.
Cool.
Barstool Warrior.
Barstool Warrior.
We'll have to talk about how you came up with that. But referencing the first song, Untethered Angel, just when I thought you couldn't get any more intricate, this is just even more involved.
Yeah.
And but the one thing that I do notice, the underlying fingering theme seems to be a 1-2-4 pattern.
Right.
So tell us about how you just constructed that. That just seems so difficult.
Sure. Well, first of all, the title, just talking about that for a second.
Sure.
When we wrote this song on the record, it's kind of one of the more proggy, kind of like UK prog sounding things, like very like Genesis-ish. And I always loved Peter Gabriel's like storytelling abilities. So I immediately kind of, as a lyricist, went into that world, and I had this vision of this guy, this lonely guy in a decrepit old pub on a marina, and maybe because I live on Long Island.
It seems like the riff is far more complicated than this guy's life.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as the riff, the fingering, the keys, the thought behind it, first of all, again, this isn't a very fast tempoed piece.
Right.
So technically, it's really not that challenging. The challenge is more mentally because it's weaving. So what I mean by that is, first of all, it's in an odd time, pretty much the whole time.
Yep.
So it's in like a 7/4 kind of feel. So you constantly have to think of sevens, except for one little section where it has a measure of 6. So that thinking in terms of 7, if you're not used to that, that could be a little bit confusing. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that it changes keys a bunch of times, and it changes modes. So, which I'll get into. But you know, as soon as you feel like you're maybe comfortable with the fingering or the sound of one of the modes, all of a sudden it changes, and that can get a little bit like twisting in your head because you're like, is it an F sharp or an F natural this time? And those kind of changes are, I think, what makes it interesting.
I think it seems that to me when I hear it and the constant shift, that you're actually changing the idea of tension on each turn, which is an interesting thing. So it's like, it's just as you said, I get comfortable, you move, and then it moves again. And then, so you almost like need to be cognizant of where you're at every moment of this riff.
And it's kind of like little minute guitar player things that I want to talk about that I think could really make a guitar part even better than just maybe the original notes. And so I want to talk about that. So, but before I do, let's just talk about where this is coming from tonally.
Sure.
All right, so the sound of this is a Mixolydian sound. Okay, so it's meaning it's going to have a major tonality, but the Mixolydian vibe is going to mean that there's a flat 7 in the scale. So instead of it coming from a major scale, the 7th note is going to be flat. All right, so in this case, in E, that note is going to be a D. So in writing this riff, you want to sort of, or I wanted to emphasize the sound of that mode has. So in order to do that, you have to kind of emphasize 2 notes in it. One is that flat 7, so that D, and the other is the major 3rd, right?
Yeah.
So. So that N, that has exactly the sound I'm talking about. So again, weaving in 7s, using that Mixolydian sound. The sort of little detail thing I was talking about is how I'm approaching it as far as picking and muting versus non-muting. Now, the sound of this, the way, the band eventually kicks in and the bass is playing along with it, is very Rush reminiscent.
Right.
It's like, I'm such a big fan of like Hemispheres era
Sure.
Rush, and that whole thing playing in these lines in unison down here. That it's just a really cool sound, especially with the Mixolydian vibe going on. But there's two different approaches to make the orchestration and the arrangement kind of have some life. So when I first introduced the riff, you notice I'm kind of muting the strings, not completely.
Right.
It's not a full-on Hetfield,
Right. Yeah.
But there's a bit of a slight mute.
Now, how do you approach that mute? I'm just curious.
Okay, so I'm muting only certain parts of the riff. So maybe the first part of it, basically you do that by bringing the palm of your right hand a little closer to the strings from the bridge.
Got it.
So that they're resting on the strings. So instead of the note ringing freely, it's going to have a deadened sound.
Right.
So the start of the riff, maybe the first note is kind of open and the next three are closed. And then the next, which kind of has that Mixolydian sound, I want to bring out, so then I open up. So it's just a matter of like lifting or moving your right hand to decide which one of those notes are muted and which aren't.
It's funny because since you're saying that, and weaving is the perfect word, it's sort of like, it's like these are the top notes of say, a tapestry, and then you're muting the underbelly.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Now it's an interesting thing.
And so those notes are going to pop out more. Now, you might say to yourself, John, who the hell cares? Like, it sounds so like minutia, like you're muting these two and not that one. But listen to the difference in approaches.
Yeah.
So if I were to play the whole thing muted, like I said before, maybe with all down, that's a whole different sound. If I play it all open, if I played it even with all down-picked squeals, that's a whole different sound.
How 80s of you.
There you go. That's very 80s.
Yeah.
Right, so the combination of muting some notes and sometimes it takes, like, this will happen during the tracking phase. That's an intro where there's guitar and keyboards only.
Yeah.
So the guitar is very exposed. And I'll go through many takes of, like, getting the perfect mute combination to make the riff speak the way I want it to speak. And I think those details, when you pay attention to those, really, it turns out that it makes, like, the notes have more meaning.
No, I love it. I mean, personally, you brought a great point here to me. It's like everything that you showed prior to that seems just very one-dimensional.
Right.
And here you are is bringing, you're emphasizing certain things. So it's actually giving it, a little bit of life to it. And so the question is, as you're saying, you do so many takes of this. Do you ever find yourself at some point like, wow, this is just wearing me down, or is it more like I just need to really get my point across?
Yeah, I think I don't get to the wearing down point. Usually, it's just a matter of, like, it's very similar to deciding on a fingering. It's like you have to kind of just get your bearings. Like, electric guitar through an amp with distortion is funny. There's so many. It's a very interactive process, and especially when you're playing with high gain.
Yeah.
So the way, like I just demonstrated, the way that you play a part could drastically change the way that comes across to somebody. You immediately said 80s just because I did pick squeals.
Yeah.
I muted the notes, it sounds more Metallica. You play it more open, it has a whole different sound.
Yeah.
It's really important. So yeah, it's just a matter of honing in on, the way to do it.
It's really a great learning thing or something inspirational to watch that, because now you're basically saying, well, it always doesn't have to be a certain way.
No.
And that's really, as a guitar player, that's really what you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's sort of what I'm trying to make you notice.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's a really clear example of that.
That's a great way of putting that.
You know?
It could also be if if you're somebody who's interested in learning a song, but let's say it was this one, and
Sure.
maybe you got all the notes right, and you check the transcription, and something about it doesn't quite sound like it when you're playing it.
Yeah.
It probably has to do with something like what I'm talking about.
Exactly. I think it's like just like learning a cover song. You're like, well, it sounds like he's got the right notes.
Sounds right, but something's not quite right. And then when you learn that the guitar player used, oh, he's playing all down, strokes on that or whatever.
Yeah.
The other part about this, a little bit about like arranging, like having the song build and grow. So the beginning is just guitar and keyboards. By the time the whole band kicks in, the idea is to have that kind of blossom into a whole another level of energy, right? So when I go to taking this riff now, playing it an octave lower, now I'm doing no muting at all. So it's full on open. So that'll take the guitar from a more dynamic place. To like a way more like open in your face. Now I'm picking harder.
Yeah.
And I'm not muting at all. The strings are fully ringing.
Right.
And that might be the type of thing, again, like who cares? Like that's such a little minute thing, but you will feel that as a listener.
Absolutely.
The band will get bigger all of a sudden.
Right.
Guitar has the power to do that. You can kind of control the dynamics, but depending on how you mute or not mute.
That's very cool. Yeah. A very important part of the song is the time signature, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying it's in 7.
Right.
And then at some point you kind of move your way towards 6.
Yeah, just for a split second. So for the most part, we're doing this 7. So it's like a slow, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. It's one way of looking at it. Or you could look at it as a faster 7, 8, where each one of those notes is an eighth note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You could think of it that way as well, which is fine. But for the most part, it's staying in that kind of Mixolydian sound. It modulates up a whole step to, again, help to bring a new level, right? But then it does this little thing where tonally now it changes. So it goes from this sort of majory sound to a more minor. I guess it's like almost like E minor-y sound, like so the notes are coming from and then a little bit of a change to like more of E Phrygian. So that's going to have an F natural. Right? So the tonality went from this kind of sound to this sound. To this sound. Right? So we go from to. And then right at the end of that little Phrygian thing comes a measure of 6, 8. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's also in, I guess, more of an E minor sound.
Wow.
And then back to the more of the Mixolydian. And one little turnaround at the end, back to that minor sound.
That's crazy. It's very clever. There's a lot of that really cool things. It almost, as you said, since you were referencing Genesis, it sounds very much like a keyboard line.
Yeah, totally.
How do you actually even get to the point where you need, like, how do I write lyrics to that kind of, having so much movement there?
Right.
And all those kind of little weaving in and out of those modal, feel.
Sure.
Like,
well, what we'll do
or
is...
melody, I should say.
I mean, first of all, the point you brought up about, the keyboard line or guitar line, I mean, it's a very collective process. So, when we're writing, Jordan and I are working really closely, like, over every note. It's like you coming up with these riffs. It's like you play it on guitar, it sounds like a guitar riff. You play it on a keyboard, it sounds like a keyboard riff. Where did it come from? It came from this, like, collaboration of people writing, and all those decisions on whether to go or mean, they're all like discussed until everyone's like, that is really cool. So it's a very interactive, collective
It seems
process.
almost tedious to
in a
debate
way.
that. I mean, almost like you're, almost as if you are trying to vote on a note.
Yeah, it does come down to that. It certainly does. Sometimes it'll literally be the difference of one note where there'll be massive discussions.
Does a melody sort of form, say whatever vocal melody form, but as you're kind of doing this, or is that something that you kind of work out after?
Sure. It's a combination. First of all, to answer your original question, the solution is like this wouldn't be a vocal section of the song.
Got it.
So even though it's weaving in and out of all these different keys and things like that, we could just worry about it being an instrumental part.
I got it. Okay.
So then vocally, we don't have to worry about that. But you know, a lot of times when we're writing, it's like we know exactly what the verse section is going to be.
I got it.
And this, you know, in this song, you'll hear it kind of break down to a way more singable chord progression.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we're writing, the vocal melodies are kind of inherent in the parts, you know, in the keyboard chords or something like that. Other times they're not. It might just be more of a bed, and then the vocal melody will come afterwards. If I'm writing the lyric, it'll come to me as I'm writing the lyric. Or we'll even work on a vocal melody together. Me, James, and Jordan will sit there and hum out a few different things.
That's great.
Even when we do that, and let's say we document that and we put that as a vocal guideline, it'll change. Once you start writing the lyrics, then things kind of shift around and change and move.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's a lot of fun, actually. I love that whole process.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Last question is in between. Do you find it more challenging to play that riff or that riff, or say Untethered Angel?
To me,
or about the same?
They're about the same. Eventually, you know, once we start playing these songs live, all this stuff will be, it really does turn into muscle memory. And the repetition just, it kind of embeds the line in your brain. Yeah. And so you know where to go. Whereas like, you know, let's say we wrote the song, we recorded it, and now I need to learn it for the tour. Like, there's a point where I'm relearning and trying to, you know, remember what happened, you know, trying to refigure out the puzzle, re-wrap my head around what were we thinking. And during that initial process, there's a lot of second guessing, like, oh, is this where was that again? And eventually that all goes away.
Wow.
And it just becomes embedded. So, but there is that process where I need to cement it in. Wow. Yeah.
So it's almost like getting athletic before your movie role.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, think of it as like going somewhere, directions. You know, it's like the first time, I have to go to this place, I'm not sure how to get there. Even if you're following your Google Maps or Waze app, you know, you're not really sure. You don't know what the landmarks are. You don't know what's next. You know, oh, there's train tracks there. But if you do that same trip as a commute, you can almost do it in your sleep.
Right, exactly.
And it's the same type of thing. So you have to go through that process where you're learning the roadmap, and then all those questions eventually melt away, and then you can just play it.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to be in.
Awesome.
Cool.